As we know from history, World War II was, and still is, considered to be one of the most brutal, terrifying, and eventful conflicts in human history. It was also a triumph, honourable and courageous retaliation to an evil empire, led by a tyrannical leader. There are so many stories, both heard and unheard, that portray the war in detail as it happened, from the initial invasion of Poland to the Victory Day celebrations around the globe. Despite knowing the facts, figures, and tales from those 6 long years, there are certain stories that pique one's interest when discussing the unknown and mysterious events which happened at the time and subsequently shaped our world forever. Operation Paperclip, despite its innocent-sounding name, was a top-secret project that occurred during the final months of the Second World War, as the Allied forces of Great Britain, United States, and Soviet Union fought back against Hitler's Nazi regime, finally ending their reign of terror. The organizations united to hunt down and capture as many German scientists, military personnel, and technological experts from occupied Germany, in order to acquire and extract as much information from them as they could. So what was Operation Paperclip's final purpose? Who was involved, and what information was collected? And was it worth it? Join us on this video as we go back to the year the war ended and a new chapter began, the year of Operation Paperclip. Welcome to Wars of the World. We all know that the internet can be a bit of a battlefield, and we can all do with a helping hand when we're online. Today's video sponsor, Aura, is a fantastic way to keep all of your information safe, as well as providing a number of other services. Once you go online, a fair amount of your personal data will be available to anyone who knows where to look, which could include your location, your phone number, and more. Aura is able to find the data brokers selling your information and send a request to them to remove it, a legal requirement that not everyone has the time to request. Aura can help keep the rest of your family safe with parental controls, an antivirus, identity theft insurance, and more. This means you can manage your security online from one app, and you don't need to download multiple apps to do the same thing. It's also all included in one affordable price. But luckily for our viewers, Aura is offering a 14-day free trial, so you can try it out for yourself. You can either surrender and let other people continue to exploit your personal information, or you can go to aura.com/wars of the world to start your free trial today. Let Aura do the heavy lifting, so you can learn more about the secret mission to bring Nazi scientists to America by watching this video. There is a lot of secrecy surrounding Operation Paperclip's purpose, role, and effect on the years following World War II. So let us briefly discuss what we know about this faction. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, was the organization who were directly responsible for Operation Paperclip itself, as well as other programs that were developed to recruit German officials for US government employment. Headed up by the Army's Director of Intelligence, the agency ran its operations between 1945 to approximately 1962, and was deemed a subcommittee of the Joint Intelligence Committee, JIC, of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs of the United States Armed Forces. Originally named Operation Overcast, the project was later titled Operation Paperclip, and consisted of roughly 16,000 German scientists, along with their families, being brought to the United States, housed and treated as employees, instead of war criminals. The main goal was to assist with the development of America's biological, chemical, and militarized weapons systems, to ensure such documentations, data, and arsenal were not seized by Soviet forces. The Soviet Union itself, for all its major efforts and victories over the Nazi regime, was slowly becoming a threat to the United States, and would result in 45 years of paranoia, espionage, and nuclear intimidation, the Cold War years. The reported duties of the JIOA, including the administrating of policies and dossiers on all captured personnel from the Third Reich, as well as being the liaison to British intelligence officers who were also conducting their own operations. The project in question only lasted 2 years, but would ignite and develop similar types of programs and administrative employment roles for those lucky enough to be spared incarceration and/or death. The JIOA was eventually disbanded in 1962 after 17 years, with the majority of the scientific and militarized weapons dossiers being transferred to the National Archives and Records Administration. All of the names and information would never have been fully collated or released to the masses, had it not been for the finding of a report in a toilet at Bonn University of all places, which would eventually become known as the Ossenberg List. The list of Nazi personnel was named after Werner Ossenberg, a scientist in Hitler's Defense Research Association, who was responsible for compiling the list of the Third Reich's top scientific minds. It is said that, even though President Harry S. Truman officially authorized Project Paperclip, the Democratic leader and 33rd president, who had only recently been inaugurated, had initially prohibited the recruitment of Nazi members or supporters. However, members of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, a precursor to the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, circumvented the order by erasing any and all incriminating evidence of war crimes from the scientist's profile history. During his first few weeks as vice president, Truman was very rarely in the presence of then sitting President Franklin Roosevelt, receiving no briefing on the development of the atomic bomb or potential threats from the Soviet Union. Once he became president, his focus would have certainly been on other projects. The final version of the venture appeared in Directive SWNCC 257/22 and was eventually approved by the President on September 3, 1946, after months of delay and deliberation, thus prompting US military departments to sponsor the immigration of those chosen rare minds to the land of the free. Many years later, in 1963, Truman classified that it was the right decision to proceed with Paperclip, stating that this had to be done and was done. Knowing that victory over Hitler's brutal leadership and administration was imminent, as well as the subsequent surrender of Japan on September 2, 1945, the captured scientists would deliberately allow themselves to be picked up by Allied forces. Those German and Austrian professionals, as well as their families, were due to face numerous hurdles in post-war Germany. Unemployment, lack of financial security, and continuous paranoia would have plagued them in uncertain times, so they would have been happy to have offered up their services. American forces were equally happy to oblige and report that, other than putting the experts under guard patrol on the ground in Germany, which occasionally happened at the beginning of the operation, there was no other alternative to keep them safe or prevent other countries from inheriting their knowledge. With the possibility of outside interference or competition from external regions, the US State War Navy Coordinating Committee, SWNCC, in coordination with JIOA, assisted with the development and implementation of Project Paperclip. If at this point you are thinking that Project Paperclip was a relatively simple arrangement, with those who were recruited being given easy or special access and freedoms within the United States, this would be incorrect. Thorough screening projects were established and managed by the JIOA due to the President's initial apprehensions, as well as the ethical, moral, and educational dilemmas that were soon to be posed. However, these screening tests were accompanied by denazification policies in the US-occupied sector of Germany, and were generally considered more important and priority-driven with regards to anyone attempting to surrender or settle within the USA. Samuel Klaus, the State Department representative for JIOA, demanded strict background checks on all candidates of the Project Paperclip, which in turn delayed the application of the exercise. But who was involved? Now we know what Operation Paperclip was, who authorized it, as well as its implementation. Let us now turn to who was on the list and to what capacity their credentials would serve the United States. Perhaps the most well-known recruit to the program, who achieved success before and after his apprehension, was Werner von Braun, the scientist who led the development of the V-2 rocket for the Wehrmacht armed forces. His rank in the Nazi Party was that of SS Sturmbannführer, which is the rank of major. He was the technical director of the Peenemünde Army Research Center in Germany and would later play a prominent role in the US space program. Having overseen and produced the rockets that would devastate Great Britain during those chaotic years, von Braun and his associates were transferred to Fort Bliss, Texas and White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico as War Department special employees. Someone like von Braun would have been extremely beneficial due to his knowledge of Nazi-developed weaponry, as would those in the field of technically superior tanks, Luftwaffe fighters and other weapons, such as the initial V-1 cruise missile. As mentioned, the German rocket guru would go on to become the director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and chief architect of the Saturn V dispatch vehicle, which launched 24 American astronauts to the moon. Another prominent figure of Project Paperclip was the German-born psychologist and medical researcher Hubertus Strughold. Known for being extremely qualified and intelligent, Strughold served as Chief of Aeromedical Research for Hermann Göring's Ministry of Aviation from 1935 until his eventual capture in 1947 by US forces as part of the project. He produced a study regarding the physical and psychological effects that manned spaceflights would have on humans, giving him the Father of Space Medicine nickname. The future war criminal would serve his adoptive homeland in a number of high-level scientific posts within the US Air Force and NASA, and was inducted into the International Space Hall of Fame in 1978. After his death on September 25, 1986, Strughold would be stripped of his honorary role, after concealed evidence proved that he was in fact involved in human experimentation during the war. Cold case occurrences, such as the Strughold admission, were unfortunately commonplace, where US military administrators covered up recruits' heinous crimes of the past. Staff were called ignorant and sympathetic to the former Nazi officers and specialists, who took part in some of the most inhumane atrocities during World War II. Another example of someone who was fast-tracked through the process and granted temporary residency in the United States was Otto Ambros, a German chemist and convicted war criminal. Ambros worked with synthetic rubber and nerve agents like sarin and tabun during the 1940s and was tried at Nuremberg. He was eventually convicted of crimes against humanity for use of slave labour from the Auschwitz III Monowitz concentration camp. However, it was also noted that the chemist, who died on the 23rd of July 1990, aged 89, had been granted visa waivers to visit the United States on at least 2 occasions. Despite the disclosure of Project Paperclip, many of the engineers, technicians and scientists would go on to achieve profitable careers in the private sector after honouring their obligation to the program. The news was understandably not well received, with protests erupting across the United States, some of which were led by the likes of Albert Einstein and former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. These protests could not dissuade or indeed extract any apology from the government, who continuously stuck to the narrative that the Soviet Union were the biggest threat to national security, and that the justification of Project Paperclip's recruitment was sound. In 1946, former Governor of Virginia, Harry F. Byrd, that their Soviet contemporaries were implementing Operation Ossewakim, a similar project, and so in 1948 wrote an article in which he publicly defended the United States and Paperclip. It would not be until the 1970s where investigative journalists gathered enough evidence that a multitude of hearings were scheduled by the US House of Representatives. A decision was reached that American military leaders had made morally bankrupt decisions on the grounds of national security, and subsequently in 1979 the Justice Department opened the Office of Special Investigations, OSI. The sole purpose of this team was to scour the land for Nazi war criminals who either took part in Paperclip or were simply living in any of the United States. Only one trial ended in a victory of sorts, when a deal was made for Arthur Rudolph, a NASA executive and assistant to Wernher von Braun, to leave the US permanently and surrender his American citizenship to avoid prosecution. The ethical, moral, and economic debate surrounding Project Paperclip continues to spark interest and investigation, even to this day. Many would consider the development of weaponry by ex-Nazi personnel such as the V-2 rocket team, to be criminal acts. It is said that von Braun visited Buchenwald concentration camp to recruit skilled prisoners to work on the hardware that resulted in the rocket, which killed many pilots and soldiers during World War II. Arthur Rudolph maintained his innocence until his death in 1996. He continuously painted the narrative that he was responsible for the improvement of living conditions for the prisoners and helped increase their ration portions. So once all is said and done, was the whole thing worthwhile? In the end, it's recorded that the government grants issued for Operation Paperclip included infrastructure, materials, hardware, and housing for the technicians and scientists was approximately $10 billion. This colossal amount of money is justified in the eyes of the government, who argued that the special operation kept the United States one step ahead of the Soviet Union and was imperative to their national security. The recruitment and inclusion of Nazi officials into army society was naturally a major cause for concern and caused outrage, as detailed earlier, especially as no paperclip scientists were found guilty of any crime either in the United States or in Germany. As time went by, more and more documents demonstrated the cover-up that pertained to German officers and their rehousing. Members such as Walter Schreiber, who in 1951 was linked to human experimentation alongside Kurt Blum at Ravensbrück. Blum was the Deputy Reich Health Leader and Plenipotentiary for Cancer Research in the Reich Research Council during the conflict. He was tried at the doctor's trial in 1947 on charges of practicing euthanasia and conducting the aforementioned experiments on humans, but was later acquitted of war crimes due to alleged assistance from the United States. Schreiber, however, immigrated to Argentina with the aid of the US military and died of a heart attack on the 5th of September 1970 in the province of Rio Negro. So was it worth it? Well, the argument continues. Before we end this episode, it's worth noting a mysterious theory that has plagued both Project Paperclip and the history of the Third Reich. Die Glock, or the Bell, was a purported top-secret weapon developed in the 1940s in Germany, and was brought to light by military journalist and author Nick Cook. The writer attributed the alleged project to the Nazis' fascination with anti-gravity, occultism and the dark arts, something which has been well documented over the years. Many believe that the Bell was a superweapon designed to turn the tide of the war and had been designed through reverse engineering tactics, as well as involvement from extraterrestrial beings. Conspiracy theorists believe that US forces recruited German scientists as part of Paperclip to develop the weapon's anti-gravity technology, something that has been widely denied but constantly resurfaces in online debate and disclosure. And so that brings us to an end. Project Paperclip did indeed exist. A recruitment process was approved by the President of the United States to assist with their military arsenal in response to the threat from the Soviet Union. Many will question the ethics behind such a project, especially the economic fallout and reintegration of Nazi officials into American society. Others will support the decision. What are your thoughts? Thank you for watching this episode of Wars of the World. We'll see you soon for another video.